Okay, so we're going to be covering majority of the combos that you can do with this extra deck, because if you're coming to me from Sam's channel, he recently uploaded a video regarding Adventure Synchron, and that extra deck focused on hand looping, where you make Trish and you double Omega and you end on 3 interactions while drawing 4 cards. We're going to be focusing on that, and I want to be showing you guys how to sequence things in a way where it can still be salvaged, assuming you make a misstep and you sequence something in a way where it wasn't initially what you intended, but you can still find a way to get to where you wanted to go in the first place. Because there's some lines where you can go charge first, you can go XL Synchro Stardust Dragon first, and you'll see as I showcase the combos, and it'll make a lot more sense. But for now, we're going to show you guys the difference between what order you sequence your synchro summonings in and what are the repercussions. Like, okay, what's the difference? Okay, because there is a slight difference. It's not too much of a big deal, but it is a difference, because that extra draw, that other boss monster that you could have had but you didn't, might cost you the game. Okay, and that's crucial. So first and foremost, this is the one that's been going around YouTube the most, right? Just Jet and Rite, because it's a 2-card combo. The adventure package it's so versatile in what it provides. Usually you're used to seeing this package just be utilized as an Omni. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily any other ways to facilitate anything else apart from that. But the way we utilize it, it can serve as that, but also used as materials, which is insane. It's our non-tuner synchro materials. So you go to the motions. This is quite standard at this point. So the thing about the SD line, which is XL Synchro Stardust Dragon, so I'll be referring to XL Synchro Stardust Dragon as SD, okay? Because it's an acronym, right? So SD is insane going second, but there's 2 lines you can do. There's 2 variations, right? Because you can either go for the Herald line, which is a bit better into Nibiru, because it ensures that you don't lose to Nibiru. Whereas if you do the SD line, you're a bit vulnerable to Nibiru, because what it does play around is they have to have 2 hand traps, but in a particular way. Because if you go with the SD line, right, they either impermit there to ensure that, okay, you don't want them to have an immune speeder, right? So then they imperm you there. Okay, so then you have to pitch for Jet, right? And then they can Nibiru you there, and then you just cooked. Whereas if you go Herald, you force them to have 2 hand traps, and it's less likely to lose to a singular Nibiru. Whereas if you do this line, it loses to a singular Nibiru, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's just reality. So if you ever go up against this, you'll know how to beat it, because you wait for the SD to use its effect. So let me show you what I mean. So right here, this is where you nib. This is where you nib, okay? But anything apart from that, Speeder's immune. At this point, everything's going according to plan. And this is where you could have done things a bit differently, okay? This is where you could have gone into Crystal Wing first to insulate your from Nibiru, assuming they didn't Nibiru you there. Because what's going to happen most of the time, since this is fairly a new deck, like we know it, for those of us that have played this for quite some time now, we know. But for them, they might not know. So then they can be like, okay, well, what do they do now? Because if they Nibiru you on resolution of Speeder, you're fine, because you keep your Stardust Dragon, you keep your Speeder. Every Synchron you have on the field, they all recur themselves. They all have grave effects. So you're not losing anything, which is insane. Okay, so right here, this is going to be one of the routes that you can take. You can go into charge and then SD, or you can go into SD first, or you can go into Crystal Wing and then special. You see what I mean? This is you do this route because you don't have room to summon a trail, and summoning trail means you're gonna want to make Hyper Librarian. Yeah, and a lot of these combos, you're gonna notice that they have something in common, where you have to find a way to sequence your assault and your Stardust off the field so you can get value off of them, because you want to be able to use Stardust effect or use SD's effect to then trigger the assault to revive the Synchro, or maybe tribute the Synchro with Stardust to then trigger the assault. And that's going to be a common occurrence that you're going to have to be mindful of, okay? And this is when you make your Baron. You go Excel. This is where the trail is insane because it's essentially 3 non-tuners. So when you summon her off Illumination, that's her first non-tuner material. And then when she leaves the field, she leaves a token. And then the third is when she revives herself from the graveyard, which is pretty cool. Go Omega. We go Rip. You go Rip. Okay. So you'll see the difference between sequencing it this way and sequencing the proper way, because this is not the best way to do it, but you can. This is still pretty good. You drew 5 cards. You end on 3 interactions. It's not bad, but it could be a little bit better. All right, so this is gonna be when you make Crystal Wing first, right? So the first one might have drawn you a few more cards, but if they nib you the moment you make your Charge Warrior, you're kind of in trouble, right? Whereas this line, it keeps effect negation in place, so you won't lose to Nibiru once you make your second Synchro attempt, right? So right here, you have Crystal Wing threatening the Nibiru, okay? Whereas the first combo, we made Charge to make room to then make, you know what I mean? So it's a different route, but it's a precaution, right? Okay, so the reason I put that card back is you don't really want to be drawing the Synchrons because it might affect your Excel Synchron's effect to be able to change its level, so just be mindful of that. Get the token. Go for Baron. Cool. So this is another hand rip 2. So that's 2 variations, right? But it gets better because there were 2 different lines, right? The first one we went Charge. The second one we went straight into Crystal Wing. Okay. So now this is the best line you can do with the deck. Okay. So this is gonna be the combo you saw in Sam's channel. Okay. This is where it gets you the full 3 rips. Gets you the Trish and it gets you the Omega. And by now, you should be aware that it matters in the order you sequence your combo, okay? Because that will make the difference, whether you get the extra draw, the extra rip, the extra boss monster. So just be mindful of that because sequencing is important. Okay, I made a mistake there, but it's fine. Okay, so then this is where Excel can be utilized in a way where it can be any level you want, right? So typically, what you've been seeing is facilitating Crimson by implementing a particular level of a Synchro, right? To target it and then summon that dragon from your extra deck. So the cool thing about Excel is that it can be any of those levels. It can be a 7, an 8, or a 9. It can even be a 10, which is insane. So like in theory, you can turn him into your Crimson Dragon if you have a level 4 non-tuner, which this is what I mean. It's so versatile. It's the options you have are abundant. It's just insane. So in this case, we're gonna go and make Excel into a 9, targeted with Crimson, making a Trish. And the cool thing about Trish is that it's a good synchro climb because we have 10s and we have access to 2 level 1s thanks to Revolution and Jet Synchron, which is insane. Okay, it's so cool. The fact that you can climb into Satellite Warrior, you can climb into Baron, you can climb into Dispator. Like, it's so cool. It's so cool. That's the third one. That's wild. That is wild. That's so cool. Okay, so now it's Revolution's turn. because this time you have to make your Baron first. Usually we climb into Baron mid-sequence or later on in the combo, but this we start with Baron. It basically insulates speeder. It's another form of insulation, which is still pretty good. It's kind of similar to how Herald protects him from nib, whereas the ASD line loses to a singular nib, you know what I mean? So that's where it's a bit different. But this is going to be Revolution's sequence. Add Draco back, add your Griffin Rider. That's how you make your 10. Revolution effect. And there's some lines where you put Baron up top because sometimes you need room, whereas you're not really gonna synchro climb away the Baron, so you need as much room as possible. And the main monster zone you kind of want to have free for like your trail, your jet, your revolution, your Stardust, you know what I mean? So that type of stuff will come up as well. Go for SD. And something that you'll notice as well, most of these lines you're gonna have to be contemplating whether you want to do this first, right? Because you need to make room to be able to summon a trail, but you need to control a Stardust Dragon to be able to use the Illuminations effect to summon from deck. And you kind of favor that because you get the most out of trail. It's a 3 non-tuner card, so you want to try to facilitate that. And TG, because like if you don't play TG, then you don't really have to, because there's no real reason to do so. But I like TG as a contingency. It just draws you into non-engines, or for whatever reason, if they end up breaking your board, then you just have an abundance amount of cards that you can just fall back on, whether it be hand traps, bunch of non-engine follow up, you know. That's so cool. Yeah, so this is gonna be a cool little niche thing that you can do. Assault reviving back your Stardust, which is pretty cool. Either by Stardust's effect or by Stardust Synchro's effect by tributing itself. Yeah, so you go for Trish here. Look at that. Climbed 3 plus 9 is 12. That's pretty cool. That's so cool. This is pretty cool. So Omega Rip, right? So okay, so this is what happens. You do it on their turn, okay? So you wait for their turn and you tag out, okay? Because you've already used the effect to tag out with Crimson, okay? So you have to do the third rip on their turn, okay? So you drew 6. You loop for 2 on your turn with Omega and Trish, and then you tag out the Crimson. Usually you tag out the Crimson for a Calamity Lock, but in this case, we're doing it to bring out a Crystal Wing, which is pretty cool. This is going to be the second iteration of the combo, and this is what I'm referring to as sequencing differently. And you get slightly different outcomes, but more so the same. But as I mentioned before, is that extra draw, that extra boss monster can make all the difference, okay? So this time we put Baron up top, okay? Because that Baron is not going to go anywhere. We're not going to synchro with him. He's just going to stay there. So we need as much room as possible in the main monster zone. How crazy was that? Make the Trish. So you can climb into it later to make a Dispator or something else. And yeah, this is what happens when you miss sequence. You draw less cards, this Trish is there, and this is what I mean. Just be mindful of your sequencing because it will affect it. Okay, so now we're gonna focus on Herald, because as I mentioned earlier in the combo, it's the one that allows you to play through Nibiru. and no other hand trap. I mean, we always fold to 2 hand traps. I mean, that's understandable. But for the most part, what's going to happen is they're going to try to ash your adventure searches. They're going to ash the enchantress. They're going to ash your tuning. They're going to ash your fool's burial. You know, they're going to ash other things as well. So be mindful of that, because if that happens, then that means that they need to have 2 more hand traps, so a total of 3, assuming they interact with you at the wrong time. And that's all based on anticipating incorrectly, but that's part of the game, right? It's meant to be deceptive, you know? It's meant to be like, okay, well, you used it wrong, and that's kind of the point. So yeah, let's go for the Herald line. Shout out to Yugioh. Go ahead and check him out on YouTube. This is his favorite line. I mean, to be fair though, SD is far superior going seconds, you know, or in any other given time. The only time Herald is better is when you go first and you're playing around Nibiru. Okay, just be mindful of that as well. Yeah. So this is where I do the climb. So you could have gone into Crystal Wing, but as I mentioned before, you won't be able to utilize Illumination's effect because you don't control a sort of synchro or a synchro that at least starts tracking in its text. And you can't foolish it because then it'll get banished, you know what I mean? And I kind of want to maintain the Herald up top because it's an insane Omni. It's an Omni, you know? So good. So this is why when we synchro climb, so we can have room for the trail, and then we make TG. All these sequences are facilitating TG. Otherwise, you would do them completely different. But I'm a real big fan of TG because it gives you a contingency if for whatever reason your board gets broken. It just reinforces what you have. Okay, so we reduce the SD. SD is a 7, and then Revolution and that make you Baron, which is pretty cool. Then we tag out. This is so cool. This is like the coolest thing. This is something you'll see yourself do frequently. Just targeting Baron to make your Dispator. This is so good. Rip 2. You missed it on a Trish, but it's a bit different because usually what happens is you have access to Excel, and Herald don't like to play well together because you would have to sequence it in a way where you use Excel's effect first before you make Herald. But since you make Herald first to protect your speeder, you kind of can't do that. And this line is not going to be utilizing the hand rip at all. Okay, you're going to end on Crystal Wing instead. So going through the motions, it's getting in the repetitions to get this combo down subconsciously. It's something that you have to do. Otherwise, you're just gonna be constantly unsure of yourself, uncertain of, oh, how do I do this again? So if you can, just solitaire at your desk. Just, you know, try to recall every sequence as much as you can, as good as you can. And if you notice, in this one, we didn't use the effect, which is pretty wild. Because we went straight into the SD, and this is what I was referring to. You could do obscure lines, obscure sequences where you didn't use SD's effect, and sometimes that's okay because sometimes you might be fixated on, oh, I have to use this effect, but there's times where you don't have to because there's lines where you can somehow make an Omega and then tribute the Omega or synchro away the Omega, and then recycle your SD and then summon SD again and then use this effect then, which is pretty cool. Drawing off TG. Get a token. I put that synchron back because we don't want to draw the synchrons. Tag out, goes a Baron. See? So it depends. This is what I mean. It matters how you sequence your turn and how you sequence your synchro summoning because we don't rip 2, you know? So just be mindful. Alright, so now we've reached the part of the combo that utilizes Calamity. You guys have seen it everywhere, and the way I wanted to approach it was no Synchro World, because it's a brick, and ensure that we don't lose to Droplet outright, right? Because it might become prevalent, and that's going to be an issue. And the way Herald prevents that from being an issue is that they can't send monsters from their hand to the graveyard for cost for the droplet, because Herald prevents that from happening. And then that means that they have to send spells and traps, meaning you can respond with monster effects, which then Baron can negate that, which is pretty good. All right, so let's get started. This is going to be the immune speeder route. Go for SD. By now, this should be kind of familiar to you guys. Okay. Go TG. Go Baron now. Go into Crimson. I put the Synchron back because we do not want to be drawing Synchrons because they might affect the Excel level module. Cool. This is where it's cool. Assault reviving your Crimson is always a cool thing to do. Make your Dispator. Remember, the end goal is to ensure that you put Sigma up top, okay? Because it becomes immune. Otherwise, it's not immune. Put a Synchron back. You don't draw Synchrons. Go for Herald. Revive. And there it is. So you drew 6. And you end on Baron and Herald. The only issue with this is it's a bit vulnerable to Super Poly, right? Because they're going to have their entire hand. You know, you did not loop them. So if they somehow Super Poly you, get rid of your Crimson, get rid of your Baron. I mean, you still have an immune, like you still have an unaffected Sigma. It's a 3k beater. You still have Herald. You drew a bunch of hand traps, so you should be okay. Whereas if you did not play TG, you would not have this as backup. You wouldn't have the Ash. You wouldn't have this Veiler. And this is why I really favor TG draws, because it just allows for this setup to just be reinforced. And now we're doing the Calamity Lock, but with Herald, okay? Here we go. And doing the Herald line first does give you protection from Niv, but it makes it kind of weird sometimes because you have to have a spell or trap to pitch for Jet, and it'll be dependent on what you mill off Revolution's effect, because then if you mill a monster, then Revolution won't be able to summon itself, which is a bit problematic because it's an extender that you want to utilize, you know. Go for the TG. We draw 2. Special. Putting the Herald up top gives you room. So as I mentioned earlier in the combo, you kind of want to keep the Synchro that you do not want to Synchro climb away up top, because that means it gives you more free zones as you're comboing off with your Revolution, your Trail token, your Jet Synchron. You want as many zones available as possible, okay? Because it gives you the most options. This is where it's cool. You use Illumination to increase Stardust to make it a 7. And then this is that's pretty funny. 5 and 7 is, yeah. But yeah, so you drew 5, right? The Revolution, right? It really depends on what you mill. So just be mindful of that. And now it's Rev's turn again. How can we do the Calamity Lock with the Revolution Synchron, okay? Just these 2 cards, no other cards to consider, because we want to ensure. Because some of you have asked if you can play the deck without Magician's Souls. And I told you guys, yes, you can play without it. But it's just really, really useful. Make your charge. Put that card back. You don't want to draw Synchrons. Go for the XL. Go for TG. Yeah, so most of these combos, most of these sequences would be different if you didn't prioritize TG Hyper Librarian. You know, you can, but as I mentioned before, why I favor it, it just gives you contingency. You know, it reinforces the board you have by drawing non-engine, which is pretty cool. Your Sigma, and this is the issue where the Sigma won't be in EMZ, but nonetheless, it's still the setup. Draw another card. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. And you rip. So you drew a few cards. Synchro World is coming up. What you can do with Synchro World, because the only difference it provides is giving you another boss monster and giving you another few draws. Okay, that's the only difference. Okay, so if you made it this far, thank you, appreciate it. We are almost at the very end of the video. Okay, so almost done. Hold on a little longer. And this is going to be showcasing Synchro World, okay? Because this is going to be pretty insane. It's a brick, so it'll be up to you whether you choose to play it or not, because at the end of the day, it's preference, right? Whether you want to go a higher ceiling, but nonetheless, it is something that you can utilize. The immune speeder here. Oh, right. Okay, it's right there. Cool. Here we go. Okay, so this is the sequence that you have to be mindful of. Is sometimes you have to tribute the Crimson. Yeah. So be mindful that if you do it the other way around, right? If you go Dispator first, tribute Dispator, revive Dispator with Assault's effect, you don't have any room in your main monster zone. Okay? So you have to tribute the Crimson first to then be able to tag it out and put it in the EMZ and free up the main monster slot. Okay? Subs. Recycle the Omega. That's just cool. Recycling your ASD is insane because that means it gives you access to Satellite Warrior Climb, right? And Immune Satellite Nuke everything. Like, that's so cool. And look, Synchro World, it's just piling up. You make the Omega again. You make your Crimson Dragon again. It's okay. Pitch. Go for a 6. Draw a card. Reborn. That's insane. How crazy is that, bro? So as I mentioned before, without Synchro World, you end on this with one less interaction, right? And you draw a couple less cards. But it'll be up to you whether you decide, okay, I want this extra boss monster. I want that. I want those extra draws, because sometimes it does make a difference, you know? Sometimes it does. But for the most part, you're just gonna win. Like, it's just the way, you're just gonna win. And once again, you gotta give Jet his time, and we gotta give Revolution his time, because they're both the newest Synchrons we have, which is, they're amazing. Well, what they provide for the deck, amazing. Okay, so this is gonna be Revolution Synchron sequence. Okay, so by now, this should be sticking by now. I know it's a long video, but I wanted to cover almost every possible combo you could do. Of course, you can make any extra deck you want, right? Any monster you want. It'll be dependent on you, but this is just covering the video you saw on Zam's channel. Okay, effect facts. Get Synchro World. Activate Synchro World. Increase, tag out. Herald. Oh, put that back. You don't want to draw it. Get Crimson. Tribute. Reborn. How cool is that? That's super cool, right? That's so cool. So if you want to play Synchro World, it is completely up to you whether you see if it's worth the risk of drawing the brick, because you do not want to draw any bricks. but it does help with having that extra boss monster and getting a few more draws, which is pretty cool. But now I'm gonna show you guys the core and how much space you have to experiment with, because it's pretty cool. Okay, so this is basically the core. Anything apart from this, you can take it in any direction, whether you want to add consistency, add interaction, non-engine, more extenders. It is completely up to you, because you can play this deck in a lot of ways. You can change your extra deck as well, right, depending, but I think these are the ones you actually need. You can't really compromise these slots. This is debatable, but for the most part, it being a Stardust Synchro that lets you have a token off of Trail whenever you synchro someone with her is quite important sometimes, because it gives you that extra non-tuner that you need, and synchro climbing him is so convenient, you know? So you can play the new Triads one, but yeah, this comes up quite often. Herald as well, but for the most part, this is basically the core of what you need, and you have so much room to innovate or improvise with. Well, I prefer this way, I prefer that way. But yeah, that's the deck. It's gotten really popular lately, and for a good reason. It's fun. This is a bit toxic, though, not gonna lie. This is a bit toxic, so yeah, hand looping is not the healthiest thing. So because like, what do you do? What do you do? Like you have board breakers, you're gonna get hand ripped. You have hand traps. Sometimes the deck can push past hand traps and then rip the remaining cards you have. And it's like, bro, that's just crazy. So I'm in fear of this getting banned. Like, Omega just insane. And no, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. But anyways, hopefully you found this video insightful, helpful, and hopefully it's not as overwhelming as you initially thought, because it's the new deck. For most of us that have been playing and been anticipating its deck's showcase, and everyone's starting to take notice. I mean, we kind of knew already. All of us, everyone in Wolfgrounds, we were all like, especially Donex. Donex is the one that's been grinding this deck for like, before it was good. like when base was a deck. Like, you know, that's a while, and it just, yeah, it was some dark times. But now this card just revolutionized the deck alongside the new addition, which is Assault and Revolution Synchron. These three cards right here just bumped up this deck dramatically. But that's basically gonna be it. If you stayed till the end, thank you so much, appreciate it. And yeah, that's basically gonna be it. Hopefully enjoy the video, like, subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.